All right, what's up, guys? Nick here with Late Night Chess. And today we're going over Saturday, October 10th's daily puzzle. This puzzle today was pretty hard, and I'll confess I did not solve the puzzle. It was very challenging, and it requires some really deep calculation. And with the board as open as what you're seeing here and queen's still on, there's still a lot of possible moves on the board. And so there's a lot of possible variations to calculate. So similar to last week's puzzle, too, this one employs some skewer ideas with the opponent's queen and king. So let's take a look at this position. So glancing at the position, you might think this is a draw, right? You have both queens on the board. One side has a knight, another side has two pawns. Black obviously wants to get the queens off the board as that removes all of white's winning chances, and black might have some winning chances with the pawns, but probably not. However, white has a forcing sequence here that will, depending on what black's responses are, either lose black's queen or cause black to get checkmated. And I'll link to the puzzle in the comments section below if you haven't solved it yet. Feel free to pause this video and give it a try. And it's white to move. Let's take a look at the first correct move here, which is queen f2, giving a check to the black king. And black has three possible moves, right? We have king c6, king d6, and king c4. In the puzzle, the king goes to c4, but just to quickly show, if the king comes to c6, then it's simply mate in one, checkmate, so that's a pretty easy variation. And then if it's king d6, there's a really long and complicated variation that I needed to look at the computer for help with. So I'll go over it briefly, but it does lead to some really bad lines for black. So after king d6, you bring your queen into d4, check. And then after the king comes back, and notice too, the king has two possible moves here. The king can go to either one of these squares. If he comes here, it's just checkmate, as we saw earlier. But if he comes here, then knight g8 just picks up the queen. So the most reasonable line would be king c7, to which the queen goes to c5. And then the king can again go to either square here. King d8 makes it a little bit harder for white to find the correct move. If the king comes to b8, then you can just play knight d7 check, king a8, and then after queen c8, then the king comes to a7, and then you have queen b8 mate. So I know that's like a variation of a variation. I'm not going to spend too much time on these variations since we have a lot more variations to go over, but just to show why that doesn't work. So then if the king comes to d8 instead, then you have queen to d6 check, check. The king comes over, checking again, and now you bring your king into b6. And now you're threatening, with your king coming into b6, you're threatening checkmate in one. So the queen has to come back and defend either here or here. But either one, let's just say queen f8. Then you have queen e5 check. And then obviously if the king comes here, there's checkmate on c7. And if the king comes to a8, then you now have this forcing mate. Queen a5 check, king coming back to b8, queen a7 check, and after the king comes over, queen a8 check. Like I said, that's a pretty long-winded variation of one move that black could make, and this is why the puzzle's pretty hard to solve, because you have to find these really complicated and crazy lines. So don't get discouraged if you didn't find that line. I didn't either. I had to go through some of the computer analysis and kind of better understand what would happen if the king comes there. But let's take a look at the actual move. So after queen f2, so we saw what happens if the king comes to c6. It's just checkmate. And if the king comes to d6, there's this very long-winded line that kind of brings the king back to the back rank. You have a lot of big threats. But instead, in the puzzle, the king came to c4, and this is probably the most instructive and interesting variation and most fun to play. So after the king comes to c4, the next move is queen c2, and what's interesting to note here is that black only has one legal move. Even though black's king is wide open in the board, all of these squares are covered by white's pieces, except for d4. So the king has to come to d4. And then this next move, which is actually one of the only moves that I found correct in the puzzle, is king b4, which is a really cool move. I'm actually threatening checkmate with queen c3. And this knight is doing a really great job of kind of guarding the squares that the queen can't guard. So, queen coming to c3 is going to block off all these squares for the king. And then the knight is finishing off by guarding the other square, so it kind of boxes in the king. So black has to do something about this because queen c3 is coming. Black doesn't have any except for one check, doesn't have any other checks. So the puzzle shows queen f8, but just to show the other possible ways of getting out of mate are really no better. If the king comes to e5, then you have knight g4 check, and you're going to pick up the queen. And if the queen takes the knight, then you have another skewer idea with either queen c3, or you could go queen b2, and you're skewering the king and the queen, and you're going to be able to win the queen. So for that reason, in the puzzle, black goes queen f8, and then white's move is king b3. And this is a very nice move because now there's no more checks for black. Black can't give any more checks, and this threat of mate is still looming on c3. So black still has to deal with this checkmate on c3. And so after, I mean, there's a couple of ways to get out of this check. Obviously, queen f6 is no good because I can just go queen c3. And if the king goes to e5, then again, I have another fork, right, where I can pick up the king and the queen. So for that reason, in the puzzle, the king comes to e3, and now I have this really good move, again, a hard one to find, which is knight g4. And knight g4 does a lot of things. One is it obviously puts the king in check, but it also attacks or defends these two squares, the e3 and the e5 square, which means that black cannot come. Not to e4, but it cannot come to d4 because now there's this checkmate, and again the knight is blocking off these critical flight squares for black. So for that reason, when the knight delivers check to the king has to come to either one of these squares, and then as soon as that happens, alarm bells should be ringing because now the king and the queen are on the same rank. So the puzzle shows king to f3, but just to show if king f4, then obviously queen f2, and I'm going to pick up the queen. And if the king comes to f3, then still the same idea, queen f2, and then after the king takes, I pick up the queen. So very challenging and intricate puzzle today. Very interesting to see similar skewer themes this week as we did last week. Thanks, everyone. And if you enjoyed the video, and you'd like to see more of my content, please hit the subscribe button or like this video, and you can also see more of my content on Twitch. And actually, if you're watching this video very soon after I posted, I'm going to be streaming very soon. So click the link below that links to my Twitch channel and give me a follow there too. And you can check out my top blog on chess.com, which is also linked below as well. So thanks, everyone. And until next time, I will talk to you soon.